Hello everyone, and welcome to another video where we're looking at the medicine through time paper. This being the fourth question that you're going to come up against. This question is kind of broken down in a more generic way in front of us now. Explain one way in which X in the years question mark was different / similar from X in the years question marks. So what this question is going to be asking you to do is look into a theme, which is the X, which is going to provide you with, and say either how it was different between two date ranges or how it stayed the same between two date ranges. So the focus is on continuity or change. Now, with all 4 mark questions, you will have 5 minutes or under to answer them, and once again, it doesn't expect you to write a lot here. And when we look at the mark scheme, what we're going to need to write is providing a difference, which is stating either a similarity or a difference based on the question. It could come either state one similarity or it could be state one difference. And then you're going to need to provide specific information about the topic is added to support the comparison. So basically you're going to want to provide evidence and explanations of both time periods to support your answer. Now, if you want to pause the video here, I give you 6 potential questions that you could run through. I plan 3 out with you. We'll go through these in a second. But yeah, just pause the video here if you would like to attempt some of these yourself. The first one that we are going to be going through is explain one way in which surgery in the years 1700 to 1800 was different from surgery in the years 1900 to present. So as you can see here, they don't give you an entire time period. I believe the examiners phrase these questions as needlessly difficult as possible to trip you up. They're trying to take you down before you even get out the gate here. Because generally when you see 1700, you'll think 1700 to 1900, 1900 to present. So that kind of idea of 100 years missing could trip you up, and we'll go into that in a second. The structure that you'd want to use is as follows. You'll give the point, one way in which you insert the theme. One way in which surgery is different or similar, so it's different. So one way in which surgery is different in the years 1700 to 1800 and 1900 to present is, then you give the point. Now following this, you need to give evidence in one time period and then explain it, and then move on to the second time period they provide you with and give evidence and explanations. So if we are going to break down surgery, we need to think of kind of what it would be like if we looked at the first date range and then looked at the second date range, and we need to try and pick apart something that is different. Now there are 3 major differences that I have come to the conclusion of, because I've kind of run out of space. There is more, but we're only going to go through 3. The first point you can include is pain, because obviously between 1700 and 1800 there was no form of kind of pain control. It was very primitive with regards to opium in some cases. However, by the 1900s, James Simpson had discovered chloroform. Now this is where it might start tripping people up. Obviously chloroform comes about in 1847, which is kind of in that blanked out date range section. However, we can still include stuff in that section even though it's not stated in the dates, because chloroform is still prevalent in the 1900s, so it is still a difference. Similarly, infection being the point, even when patients were to survive surgery in the 1700s to 1800s, usually infection would kill them. However, once again in that kind of blanked out date range, 1865, Joseph Lister's discovery, or should I say use of carbolic acid, massively reduced the risk of infection and boosted the success rates of surgery. And the final one, which some might go for if they're not feeling very confident in addressing that kind of blanked out date range, was that in the 1700s to 1800s there was no technology when it came to surgery. But that's not really evident, so I'd kind of lose myself a mark there more than likely. However, there was a huge spike in technological advancements in the 1900s to present section. Now for this, top tips, there are no real top tips other than a very basic highlight the question, understand the theme, the 2 date ranges, and whether they are asking you for a similarity and a difference. Just highlight the question on this section because this question is needlessly complex, and highlighting just makes it so much easier to understand. At a glance, I know it's about the differences in surgery between 17 to 1800s and between 1900s to present. Now, when I put this into a model answer, it looks as follows. One way in which surgery was different between 1700 to 1800 and 1900 to present was the discovery of anesthetics. Between 1700 to 1800, surgery was hugely limited due to the issue of pain, with surgeons dealing with this through the use of opium and often physical restraints. This hugely limited the types of surgeries that could be performed, as well as the mortality rates of surgery due to the patient moving during the procedure due to still being awake. So that's the first time period addressed there. However, by the 1900s, showing that I'm understanding that it is asking me about the 1900s, by the 1900s, chloroform had been discovered by James Simpson in 1847 and continued to be in use, allowing for deeper and more advanced surgeries that would have been impossible just a century earlier. So in this, I give the point: evidence explain one time period, evidence explain another time period. And even though my evidence is in that kind of blanked out date section, because it's still being used in the 1900s, I can still drop that knowledge. Now, just to go over two more plans for two different questions. This is one: explain one way in which the ideas about the cause of illness, so there we have the theme, in the years 1700 to 1850 were different, so the similarity of different bit addressed, from the ideas about the cause of illness in the years 1900 to present. Now, with certain questions, it's only going to really have one theme that you can address, or one point that you can address to really be able to provide the maximum evidence to boost your chances of getting that 4 out of 4. And for me, this is the scientific approach. Between 1700 to 1850, miasma was still the most popularly believed cause of disease through the time period. However, by the 1900 to present, because of that scientific approach, there was a shift over to germ theory once Robert Koch had built on the work of Louis Pasteur, publishing his works in 1885. Just making sure that when you're in that second section of evidence, you're stating clearly, as I did before, that even though it is in the 1900s, germ theory was still in circulation as the main cause of illness. And to move on to a second question, it explained one way in which care in hospitals in the years 1250 to 1500 was different from care in hospitals in the years 1700 to 1900. Now, of all of the questions that we've gone through, I would say this question is the most kind, because it's clearly addressing two whole date ranges, and it's not really trying to trip you up as much as the other two. But you may not be that lucky when you get in the exam hall. So for this, the two differences which I can see in hospital care was sanitation, that being between 1250 to 1500, the idea of hygiene was basically non-existent. However, from 1700 to 1900, Florence Nightingale had come about and conclusively proved that good sanitation boosted a reduction in mortality rates. So simply put, keeping things clean means less people dies. But also we could talk about, as another point, the purpose of hospitals had changed. Between 1250 to 1500s, hospitals kind of were built from the term hospice. That's where hospitals get its name from, the idea of providing a sick person with a place to rest. It was hyper-focused on care. It did not treat. However, from 1700 to 1900s, there was a shift from care to treatment, and they were now actively providing treatment with the inclusion of surgeons, pharmacies, and nurses all within these hospitals in this time period. So to conclude for this video, make sure you pick the right point, provide evidence from one time period and evidence from the other time period, and do yourself a favor and highlight the question so it is easier to understand. These examiners are horrible, and they will needlessly complex a question which is basically, why Was care in hospital different, or how was it different between 1250 to 1500 and 1700 to 1900s? Do not get bogged down in the question, highlight it, understand it, and move on. Thank you for listening.